Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you. My name's Peter Prengeman. I'm AP's Climate and Environment News Director. It's so great to be here, so great to welcome you after all these months of planning for this event that's being put on by AP and AP's Fund for Journalism. We have some terrific panelists, a great program, and I hope some really lively discussions. And we want these discussions really to be interactive, so we'll have a few minutes at the end of each session for you to ask questions, to tell us you disagree, whatever it is, we want to hear it. To kick things off, please join me in welcoming Paul Haven. He's Vice President and the head of AP's Global News Gathering. Paul?
Oh, wow, that's great. That never happens to me. Thank you all, and welcome. It's really my honor to welcome you to this event. I just thought I would speak a little bit about climate coverage at the AP. So about 3 years ago, with the help of foundations, we stood up our climate and environment team with the aim of delivering vital stories about climate change to audiences around the world. And that remains our goal today. You know, I think climate coverage, we're living in a crazy world, but the changing climate is arguably the most important story of our time because it affects every human being on the planet, in fact, every living thing on the planet. But despite that, you know, it can sometimes be hard to connect with audiences, and I think there are a few reasons for that. You know, for one, there's always seemingly more pressing stories. There's wars, there's elections, there's gun violence, and those stories compete for attention and seem more immediate to people in the moment. The other thing is that, look, let's face it, climate science can be wonky. It can be difficult for people to understand. It can be inaccessible to people. And there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there as well that kind of muddies the picture. So it's difficult. I would also say, you know, the scope of the challenge facing humanity is extremely daunting and can lead to a sense of hopelessness that sometimes would pervade traditional climate coverage, and I think make people tune out because there's no, you know, what can they do? What's the solution? And so our team, to cut through all of that, has, you know, I would say we've learned an enormous amount in the last 3 years, and to cut through all of that, you know, we are trying to do climate coverage in a different way. We're trying to make sure that our climate stories are people-focused, first of all, because people connect with stories about other people, that they're told in plain language that people can relate to and not be wonky, and very importantly, that they have really strong visuals, really strong photos and video. That's absolutely essential to telling stories that people actually want to engage with. So the other thing that we do here at AP, and I think that we can leverage here because we do have hundreds of journalists around the world with expertise in all sorts of areas, is thinking about climate coverage as more than just climate stories. So climate stories can be politics stories, they can be sports stories, they can be fashion stories, they can be stories about inequality, really anything, because climate does impact every aspect of life. And then the last thing is making sure we tell stories in a way that doesn't just tell people what they need to know, but gives them information that they can apply to their lives. They can act on themselves, what we call news you can use, which I know you're going to be hearing about as well. So AP's climate team strives to do all of that, combining, you know, the fact-based journalism that AP is known for and our global reach with a digital-first approach, which means experimentation, a spirit of experimentation in terms of the way we tell stories, which I think you'll hear about as well today, which is I think really, really exciting, because the idea is to, we have a phrase, create how you consume. You know, how do you get your news, and how do you enjoy getting it? We should be creating journalism in the format that we ourselves and our families enjoy. So today you will learn about that. And the first panel we've got for you is going to focus on climate choices, the kind of news you can use. And then you will hear in the next panel about the annual climate talks, COP30, which are taking place in Brazil later this year. And then finally, you will hear from some of our climate content creators who are producing really powerful stories on social media. So I'm really excited about it. It's so great to have all of you, and welcome to AP. And with that, I'm going to turn you over to Peter. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's get into that first panel. As Paul said, it is on climate choices. This is an initiative we began earlier this year. And the idea was simple, to basically reach consumers, reach people where they are, and give them news that they can use. Joining me are the three journalists who are leading this effort, Kaylee Wells, Kiki Sidiris, and Aya Diab. And to give you guys a sense of the work that they're doing, we have a short video. Can we play that?
Yes, we need big climate action, but individual choices still matter, and people want to be part of the solution. That's where AP's Climate Choices team comes in. We help people from different backgrounds figure out what actually makes a difference. Kaylee Wells reports on how everyday choices impact the environment. Aya Diab produces digital video that brings it all to life. I'm Kiki Sidiris. I host and produce social videos that make the climate make sense. From picking the right AC to staying cool in a heat wave to packing a go bag for a hurricane and deciding what to eat and where, we help people make climate choices that work for them and the planet. We're here to give people the information they need to make choices that actually make a difference.
All right, let's get into it. Kaylee, let me start with you. When you go out to tell a climate choices story, what are the things that you're thinking about? What's the internal thought process in your head?
Yeah, well, I mean, the good news is I'm sort of the ideal audience for these stories, so I think about something that I want to hear. It's going to make me feel better about my climate impact, and then I tell that story. So, you know, I'm someone who's like relatively educated on climate change, someone who is kind of wigged out about what role that I play in it, and someone who wants to figure out how to do that better. So, you know, if I'm at the grocery store and I'm wondering the difference between quinoa and rice, then, well, maybe we could tell a story about that. Or I know that every time I get on a plane, it's really gnarly and takes up a lot of pollution and really increases my own footprint. So, well, maybe we could do a story about the offsets that people are saying help make that less. But is that actually the case? And so maybe we can dig into that. Anything that either inspires wonder and curiosity in me, something that makes me really question my own everyday life that I am already participating in, or something that makes me feel better, or that's I think the best kind, the kind that makes me feel excited about a change that I can make in my life and makes me think, well, shoot, somebody else is going to want to know about that too. So
Yeah, so basically, if this is interesting to me, it'll probably be interesting to other people.
that's the hope. And I know I'm kind of a nerd about that kind of thing, but I still think that there are a lot of people out there who want to have that same feeling of agency in participating in the climate solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will note, Kaylee arrived here from Cleveland on the train. So she took the train quite a long
13 hours.
13 hours. But good for the climate. Good for the climate.
Yeah.
Kiki, let's go to you for this one. There are lots of ways that you can tell news you can use, stories. I think you could present them like, dear reader, here are the choices, here are things you can do. But some of your recent stories have taken people through your experiences with whatever you're talking about. Can you talk a little bit about some of those stories?
Yeah, I realized that I feel uncomfortable sometimes making certain choices that might be better for the environment, whether that's because of social anxiety or because I have to let go of convenience in my life. And I realized that if I can bring people along for the journey and show them, hey, I looked into plastic waste and I realized that I can reduce my own by going to a restaurant and giving them a glass Tupperware instead of, when I'm ordering takeout, instead of using their plastic packaging that I'm just gonna throw away at the end. I'm gonna show them how awkward it was to ask a worker, hey, can you put my salad bowl in a Tupperware, please? I'm gonna show them, hey, I was intimidated in the beginning, but I got over it, I did it, and now I feel better about myself, and I feel like I actually made a difference for the planet. I'm taking people along for the journey, and I'm showing them like, hey, it's not that hard. you can do it too. So I think it's just a way to build trust with my audience and relate to them, and it starts a conversation in the comments, which is way better than just laying out a list of things that people can do and asking them to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sometimes laying out things that people can do feels like a little eat your vegetables kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? And the way that you're presenting some stuff, you're telling people, hey, I'm actually trying this out, you know? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I wanna go to you for this one. When we talk about climate solutions, often we talk about big systems change, right? Changing how we power our world from fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal to wind and solar energies, and it feels like really big. But there are things that people can do, small things that people can do that actually make a big difference. Recently you did a story on phantom energy. Can you tell people what that is and what that choice is?
Yeah, absolutely. So to start with, phantom energy is also known as vampire energy, which is basically the power that your devices use when they're plugged in, but you're not actually like actively using them. So that could be the charger that's in your wall. That could be, a gaming console that's in standby mode. The drain can be invisible, but it's adding up across households. So what I really liked about the story is that if you decide to unplug the charger or turn off your power strip, it's not going to take much sacrifice. So that is like maybe a smaller step. It's not going to make a lot of difference in your life, but you can be cutting emissions, saving. So I really like that climate choice as a tangible, doable, and practical decision that you can take without much sacrifice.
And I will say, one thing we've seen in the metrics is that these stories do really well, particularly compared to some of our more traditional climate stories. And I think that is because there is this engagement. There is this thing that people say, oh, I get that. I can think about that. So I think that it shows, it resonates. It resonates. All right, at this point in the panel, I think I need to play devil's advocate a little bit, and there may be some people out there who would agree with this. Whenever we talk about big changes in the environment, there's no question that policy is key, right? That's how real changes are made. If you look at the air in the United States, for example, it's a lot cleaner than it was 20 or 30 years ago because of the Clean Air Act of 1970 and then lots of updates to that. So if we need to combat climate change by big policies, why are we telling stories on the individual level? Why are we focusing on the consumer? Who wants to take that one on?
I mean, we get these comments all the time on our videos, right? What does my choice matter? What about big oil? What about the government? What about corporations? And it's something that I pose to my experts all the time. Why does this individual choice matter? And I think every expert has the same answer, which is that people vote with their dollar. If you want to make a difference, you got to start with yourself. If I'm posting a video showing that I switched from a tampon or a pad to a menstrual cup, and then 1,000 people share that video, maybe 500 of them actually make that change, that actually sends a message to the people in power. Or at least I'd like to think so.
Can I also add the importance of agency? Like, it provides the consumer agency. This idea that we're just waiting on politicians to make big sweeping changes. Like, yes, we've been tasked as humanity to move a mountain, and yes, those guys have bulldozers and we're sitting here with shovels. But like, the shovels still do something even while we're waiting for the bulldozers and voting for the bulldozers and hoping that they're gonna come up at some point too. But if I sit and twiddle my thumbs waiting for the bulldozer, I love taking an analogy too far.
It's a good one, though. It works.
But if I
like
sit
it.
and
Okay.
I'm waiting for the bulldozer to come, I feel like I'm gonna just sit in my existential dread and feel like I can't do anything, and that's gonna add to the mental health decline and feeling depressed and feeling hopeless. But providing this agency for readers helps them become a part of the solution, and it helps them, feel like they have a stake in the game.
So to take that a little bit further, because the argument often is in focusing on individuals, you are letting politicians, policymakers off the hook, right? But that's not the case, you don't think? Aya?
No, I don't think it's like an either-or situation. I think it's a balance of both. So I think when we raise awareness about these issues and the audiences get to know these issues more, maybe they're more inclined to go and maybe address like a policymaker or like start, working with a certain policy or like how to put this policy in place. So maybe they're like more inclined to do something. So I think all in all, it's something that it's a balance. Policy is necessary, but I think people also get agency, and when the issues are they're more aware of it, I think that also works better.
Okay. Kelly, I want to ask you about something that's a little bit sensitive. You wrote a story about a month ago, maybe
Yeah,
a little bit more, that garnered a lot of hate mail, a lot of just vile stuff online. So tell people about that and why you think it prompted such hate, because that's
Yeah.
what it was. Yeah.
I think it was just surprising because it didn't feel like when we started it was going to be the story that garnered a lot of hate mail. It was a story about a study where basically the respondents in the study were asked to rank different decisions and how they impact the climate. So it's everything from like changing your light bulbs to flying less to eating vegan to washing your clothes in cold water, and ranking which ones had the biggest climate impact. And people were pretty bad at it. And so the point of the story was just, well, let's talk about why. What is the climate psychology involved that makes people think that recycling has a bigger impact than owning a pet? And owning a pet was one of the 20 things. And so the folks at the AP were like, well, the owning a pet thing is really shocking. Like we should put that in the headline. That's a really big deal, and probably surprising to a lot of people. And the pet owners read it. And they were really in my inbox about it. And they didn't want to get told that their pets were part of the problem, because I think it's because it's this really personal thing. It's really important to them. Like being a pet owner is like a really big part of my identity. I would feel really maybe personally attacked if you're telling me that I shouldn't be owning my dog, which is not what we did.
Right.
But that's what they heard.
That's what they heard. That's what they heard. And I should say, part of it was our fault at AP. The headline had been changed. I mean, we are very aggressive in AP and really trying to reach digital audiences. And when our team sees that a story is really resonating, then the next question is, what else can we do, to really give it more pop? So the headline was changed. I saw that headline change. It didn't register to me that this was that this would set anybody off. And then by the time she reached out and said, I've got these 10 really angry emails, I was like, oh damn. And then we changed it from there. And I should explain that the dog part of it, or pet part of it was only because different animals obviously eat meat or eat meat products. And as we know, meat is one of the largest contributors to climate change, through methane from cows and of course deforestation that happens to raise a lot of cattle. But yeah, it was a lesson learned. You just never know what is going to set people off. That leads me to a next question. For any of you, as you think about this in the 6 months or so we've been doing this, are there any climate choices that are off limits that we really shouldn't write about, post about?
I think there are angles and there are wording that is off limits. I think, like using the word should, or suggesting that there should be shame because of a decision that we're making. I think there are careful ways to touch really just about anything. So for example, like one of the things that the people said in my inbox were, well, you're talking about pets, why aren't you talking about children? Children have a way bigger impact than pets do. But if I say, okay, so are we going to talk about children? Are we going to talk, but we can't talk about whether you should have a child or not. That's not really our lane, and it's not really appropriate. But, maybe there is room to be discussing the impact of that decision. But if we're okay talking about children, like, I don't know, are there topics that we can't touch? I'm not sure. I just think it's a matter of how you go about it in a way that's careful and like positive and providing agency, not instilling shame.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be brave and say no. I think that people don't like to be told, hey, what you're doing is wrong and you can be doing it better. So I think it requires a lot of nuance. I think we have to be careful the language that we're using. Like you said, there's no shoulds. It's this, you could be doing better and this is how you can do it. But no, I don't think anything is off the table.
Yeah, I think the same thing too. It's all about like how it's framed and just making it accessible and not telling people that they should do this, especially if they, for instance, maybe not everyone has the same resources and not. Yeah, I think we just shouldn't be telling people you should do this and just shaming and guilting them.
Yeah. I will say with children, I'll just share, we've had some really interesting discussions on how we tell that story, and the framing, like you said, is really important. And in the end, Kaylee is working on a story on children, and but we decided to focus it more on how a lot of people say that they have climate anxiety, and that climate anxiety is leading them to not have children or have fewer children. And so the idea is to frame it like that, and not more or less of a choice, could you or should you have a child. So that's one where we looked at it through a climate choices lens. Maybe we could do it in really careful framing, but it just felt more comfortable switching it to a little bit more traditional to examine this through more of a traditional lens. Okay, so I do want to ask you guys a little bit about how you see your stories in relation to the rest of the report. I'll just share that when we started this initiative, several people on our team and other people across AP asked me, looking at the numbers and saying, should we all be telling climate choices stories? Are we going to have to do that? I mean, some people are excited, some people like, oh, not so much. And my answer to that was no. In a digital report, we need a variety of stories and formats and all kinds of things. So no, we need to tell all kinds of stories. But I wonder how you guys see what you do in relation to the rest of AP's climate report.
I think our stories help audiences engage with the stories that are difficult for their heart to tackle. So like, AP is going to send somebody to Brazil. We're going to do a COP story. There's probably going to be some dark news in there. Like, so it's just sort of part of how it works. But if you're really internalizing the bad news or the really gnarly study that says we only have 10 minutes to save the world or whatever the next study is, you need to be able to like have the resilience and the hope to believe that I can tackle this story, like I can consume it as a reader, and that it's worth consuming and that it's still something that is savable. And I really think the climate choices stories allow them to feel like they are part of the solution, and therefore that inspires hope, and that hope provides them with the resilience necessary to tackle the stories that my other climate colleagues are doing. And so I think our stories help readers engage in our other climate stories even more.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That was beautiful. It really was. I mean, it helps bridge the gap. It really does. It makes people feel like, hey, maybe I'm not powerless. Maybe I actually do have a choice, and maybe I can actually make an impact. It brings those stories closer to home.
Yeah, it builds kind of knowledge, right, and comfort. I like that. I might use that. I can use that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's complementary. Excuse me. So I feel like people experience climate change the most through, for instance, maybe their daily lives, like the bills they pay, the food the products they buy, the use and the food they buy. So I think they're really complementary. It gives people agency to be able to do something, and then just understand the overarching climate issue.
Okay. All right, let's move into a speed round. Your favorite climate choices story and why? I'll give you guys 20 seconds to think about this, because this is off script, right? So,
I mean, I already knew.
you already know, okay. All right, you have to think about it.
Whenever we talk about IRA stuff, or excuse me, the Inflation Reduction Act, or any kind of ways that you can participate in, the federal government will give you money to replace a heat pump or whatever. Everyone says you got to start with a home energy assessment. which is where some HVAC expert comes to your house and says, this is what's messed up. You got a big leak over here. Your furnace is about to bust, but your windows are really leaky, so we should start with the window, And I had someone come into my 100-year-old home in very cold and very hot Cleveland, walk around my house and do a home energy assessment and basically tell me my house is a mess. And so it was a first-person story, which was also kind of, I know it's not unheard of with the AP, but it's a little more experimental and a little more unusual. Yeah. And so it was, you guys, here's what happens when a home energy assessment happens. I did it on my Century home, and here's what I learned. And I loved it because I, again, was fascinated by the result and thought, wow, everybody else is going to want to hear this. And they're not going to be mad at me because it's not a story about what they should do. It's just they're learning from my example.
Yeah, and the results surprised you, right?
Yes.
I mean, you thought you were going to come out of there with a $40,000 bill, and you could have done that. But
Yes. Yeah, they said, I thought, well, it's an HVAC guy, so he's going to tell me I need a new heat pump and that I should have a new water heater, and he said, you never got your house insulated because your home is from the time when knob and tube wiring was the thing, and insulation would have sparked a fire once upon a time. So even though the knob and tube isn't being used anymore, my walls aren't insulated. So he was like, you got to call the insulation guy. And you need to seal these giant gaps and holes in your house. And then maybe later we can talk about the heat pump. But those were way more affordable and impactful decisions that I ended up making.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Who wants to go next?
I thought Wrong Choices was really interesting. I really liked how, I didn't know why people really, the psychology behind people thinking that recycling is the best thing and that there are maybe more important things. And then the other one was Kiki's Tupperware video. I really liked that, just, going to places and asking to put that in a different container. I really liked that.
I'm glad my public humiliation ritual was fun for you. It was fun for me too. I like that story too. I like your phantom energy story. The fact that it's called vampire energy, I think that caught a lot of people's attention. Mm-hmm. I really, unexpectedly, one of the favorite stories that I've done is the one about air conditioning, whether or not it's more energy efficient to turn off your air conditioning completely or just turn it down a little bit. Most of the experts that we spoke to said to turn it down a little bit. I like that story because people in the comments were outraged. I had households torn apart debating what the solution was. The solution did surprise me too. And I changed, that's actually something tangible that I was able to do. I changed the way that I operated when I left my house. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I really encourage everybody to watch some of these and to see the things that they're doing. It's really engaging. It's fun, and you come away in a minute and you really learn something. All right, last question before we go to some of your questions. One tip that you would give other journalists younger journalists coming up, older, more experienced journalists, to tell stories through a climate lens. If you had to pick one thing that you would give them as a piece of advice.
Starting with accessibility. The stories that everyone is able to participate in, people are going to be way more open-minded to that. If I say you need to drop $18,000 on a heat pump, most people are going to say, I don't have $18,000 and why are you telling me what I should be doing? If I say next time you go to the grocery store, if you make this swap instead of this swap, it's actually going to save you money and it's better for the planet. Anybody can do that. Everybody eats. That's why I love the food stories. So things that are accessible and don't require this buy-in because of this sort of misled belief that being climate friendly requires that you have a lot of spare money. It doesn't. So finding those stories that prove that that's true.
Interesting. Okay.
I think if you're going to do a climate choices story, first of all, try it yourself. Try the choice yourself. That helps build trust with the audience. Also, always show people why their choice matters, because people we see are feeling powerless these days, and you got to show them that they're not. Their impact they can actually make an impact, and their decisions actually do matter.
Yeah, and I think just to build off of that is just start with the daily things, what people do, the products they use, and stuff like that. And I think basically that could maybe translate to a bigger decision and stuff like that, just making it seem accessible to them.
Okay. Should I go there for questions? Yeah. All right, I would love to take a couple of questions if people have some. Boy, I saw you right there first, and speak up, because we don't have mics to. Oh yeah, go to the podium. That's fine too. Oh, perfect. Oh yeah. Who knew you were going to be part of it? I thought you wanted me to go to the podium. I was like, oh.
Hi, my name is Sun, and I work for a major communications agency. And my question is, obviously, right now it's a tough climate. I don't mean to make a pun, but it's a tough climate for anyone communicating about climate. And I'm just curious, you had the conversation about language. Do you feel that your language, or you've had to be more careful about the language you use in your stories, so that, to avoid backlash or criticism? And I guess related to that is, are you finding that there's more demand for your kinds of stories, greater engagement, et cetera? So.
I think maybe I'll answer that one. So we're thanks for the question. We're always very careful in the language, just as AP is, to make sure that what we're putting forward is as objective as possible. We don't pull any punches, though. I mean, AP's climate coverage starts from the basis of science, starts from the basis that it's just basic physics, right? You put so much CO2 and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and it heats the planet. So we don't engage in any sort of, well, he said this and maybe that, but we're definitely very careful with the language. In terms of people asking for this kind of content, yeah. I mean, we have seen particularly on AP News, engagement in ways that we haven't found with a lot of our other, more traditional climate stories. So you want to just pop up, or you could ask and I could repeat it to everybody if that makes it, whichever, does that work? Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for what you do. I just have one question, which is, I hear the language of news that you can use, consume. That's a language of everything is usable, everything is a market. Isn't that the problem with climate, that we see everything as something to be consumed and to be used? And isn't journalism falling into the same issue? I mean, what about writing a story that nobody reads? It's still valuable, no? I mean, I understand the tension with being a business and supporting and paying salaries, but how do you deal with that paradox?
Yeah. I'll start, and then if anybody wants to add to that. You bring up, oh, sorry, I didn't answer any questions. So, if I synthesize what you said, in talking about news you can use, he made the point that we're still coming back to consumerism, right? We're still coming back, right? I mean, that, and so isn't that the problem with climate in general, in climate change? One of the big issues, one of the things that's pushed climate is consumerism. Yeah, you make a good point. I think there are really strong currents in sort of the climate space that the real problem is capitalism, right? You get this a lot, and that if we all just stop buying so much, that we would have fewer problems. I think there's some validity to that. A lot of the stories that they work on really focus on reusing things. Thinking about, do you need to buy this? Can you reuse that? Your Tupperware story where you're going to the restaurant and saying, put it in this, not in some other packet or something. But I feel like if you go too far with that, then you're trying to take on capitalism and you're trying to take on the systems of the world. And I think those are worth debating, but not going too far with, if that makes sense. I don't know. What do you guys think about any of that?
I feel like your fashion story makes me think of that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think, like Peter said, every time we speak to experts, the answer is always, you gotta consume less. Like, the best thing that you can do is limit your consumption. I think, are you asking specifically, like, we're creating content that people can consume, so aren't we adding to the problem? Is that what you're asking? Okay. I think that there's value in what we do. I think that we're creating content for people to consume, but we're teaching them we're giving them valuable information that they can use to apply to the rest of their lives, and maybe they consume our content, but because of it, they're consuming less in other aspects of their lives, and that actually balances it all out and makes a difference.
Bill, you want to?
Yeah, how much time do you guys spend trying to convince people that that climate change is a problem worth trying to solve right now? Because as you know, there's a not insignificant constituency out there, including our Secretary of Energy, that arguably says it really isn't something that needs solving right this second.
Yeah.
Or either this year or next year or next decade.
So the question is, how much time do we spend in our stories trying to convince people that climate change is a problem that needs to be tackled? I think every one of our stories really try to point out the basics of where we are with the planet and show how warming is leading to extreme weather, is leading to a lot of alterations of the planet. So again, to the question of framing, we would never say, and you know this, Bill, we would never say, you should pay attention or this is, but we lay out what is happening. And in every climate choices story too, there is some, what I think of as, because I'm an old text guy, but meaty paragraphs that set the stage for that, for the context of why it is that we're telling you about whatever product. But it is a strong current, because if you look at the Trump administration, it has basically said whatever is happening with climate, we're just not going to prioritize this, right? And so in the stories that we tell, we point out what is happening with the planet, and it's for people to decide, what they want to do. You in the front?
Thanks. I'm Ed King from GSCC. A lot of the international polling shows that interest in climate and the priorities that sort of consumers rate it is falling. But I'm kind of interested whether the reactions you get from either on social media or from emails, is that something that you're seeing? And are there any geographies around the world, excluding the US, where you're seeing a lot of people reading your stories and engaging? It would just be interesting to kind of understand if there's some countries where there is real interest in this, but we're potentially not seeing it in the kind of polling and demographics.
To synthesize his question, it is, are we seeing, if we could talk a little bit more about where we're seeing the engagement, because polling shows that there's less interest in consumer-focused stories. Is that a fair synthesis? Yeah. Okay. Anybody want to take that on? Like where you've seen some of the engagement? I could say that we don't look necessarily specifically at polling and the interest in that. What I'm really looking at is what's on AP News, on our site, how many people are seeing the story, and then downloads. We look very closely at customer downloads. We have thousands of customers around the world. That shows me a lot of engagement. But you make a good point. I think some of this is probably more US focused than other parts around the world. I don't know.
I think people are really engaged in the stories where we're showing them that if they make this climate choice, they can save money. People really care about their money. We see it with the home energy assessment story, the phantom energy story, the air conditioning story. If we can show people, hey, you can make this choice that's better for the environment, and also you can save some money, that gets them paying attention more. So I don't think we've had a problem with engagement on these stories.
How about you?
You mentioned the headline for the pet story kind of was a little bit, caused a little bit of a dust up. I know sometimes media can have a reputation for headlines that are more doomer or like clickbait. How do you approach headlines? And like if we're coming from a place where we're worried about what the headline might be, that could be over exaggerating something or make it worse. Like as I'm a communications professional, what agency do we have in that? And just how do you approach headlines so that they aren't like considered clickbait?
So the question is, how do we approach headlines so that they are not clickbait? Headlines are tricky. You're always trying to sum up what the story is, like really tell the reader what they're about to get. but do that in an interesting way, right? And add to that, don't go so far that it is clickbait. I think it's just a lot of kind of careful back and forth, which didn't happen at the level that it should have for her story. And I just have to own that as the editor of our team. We have a digital team, and we have a lot of checking of headlines, sometimes even before stories go, and then when they go out, to see, we have what they call A/B tests, where they put different headlines through and see like what may resonate more. And the process we have for that is we put these alternate headlines, and then the editor and the reporter look at them and think, is this okay? So we try to build in some guardrails. But sometimes you get it wrong and you get surprised. You right there.
Thank you. My name's Emily Gaylord. I work for a company called CET as the communications director, and we work in like what I would call like the least sexy place of climate change, which is in basements and attics, like in your assessment, in kitchens, boiler rooms, and things like that, doing pragmatic implementation of waste reduction and energy efficiency. And first of all, I want to commend you, because I think figuring out how to tell those stories is in an engaging way is difficult, and I'm just curious how you're navigating that tension point between like pragmatic things people can do and then like an emotional response, because I think sometimes there's like those stories in like a heat wave can elicit a very emotional response, and what you're doing feels very practical, and I'm wondering how you're navigating that balance.
So the question in synthesis is how they navigate the balance of telling a practical story and the emotional piece that comes from sometimes covering climate change.
Yeah, those are my favorite. I'm a total nerd about this thing. So I love to be like, look at this boring thing that you probably aren't thinking about as you're sitting in this temperature-controlled room and you're not really actually feeling the effects of climate change. And let me tell you how relevant it is. I think like we were talking about earlier having this sort of nut graph that like lays the stage, and I like having a stat or two that says this is actually how big of a difference this makes, or this is the percentage that it's adding to greenhouse gas emissions, or the percentage of your personal impact, or blah, blah, blah. Something that says this is so important, and then trying to like have my own like nerdy enthusiasm about it seep into the writing as much as we can, while still maintaining the sort of AP style and how we present things. But I think trying to just be a human when talking about the sort of boring, less human related things is still really important, because they're worth telling. It's just we have to tackle the challenge of making them elicit the same emotion that the heat wave or the hurricane does.
Time for one more question. How about you?
Hi, my name is Daniel Rossi Keene. I live in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh.
Not too far.
I'm the founder and executive director of a community-based nonprofit in a legacy steel town that got beat up in the 80s. Recent resurgence of petrochemical development, one of the largest petrochemical facilities in recent memory built in our community. Bellwether County, in a bellwether state that has voted red in the last 3 election cycles. And oftentimes the kind of messaging that our community confronts are messages that are perceived as like something they have to stop doing, something they can't have. You can't have your jobs, you can't have your plastic water bottles, you can't have, on and on and on and on. We found that to be particularly unhelpful in generating not only engagement, but also mindset change. So our strategy increasingly is really trying to engender a kind of a different kind of imagination for what an economy looks like, for what quality of life looks like, for what a region would look like if we adopted some of these fundamental shifts. And so I guess out of all that, my question is, like, what role does imagination and painting a different picture of a future play in the stories that you're telling? How can that be centered more? How can that be a kind of carrot rather than a stick strategy?
The question is, how does imagination play into the storytelling imagination of presenting a world that could be different, of things that could be different, instead of just the stick? Where are the carrots? Yeah, it's a great question. Who wants to take it?
I mean, I just moved from Los Angeles County to Cuyahoga County outside of Cleveland, and I feel what you're saying more now that I live there. That sort of, I'm feeling threatened by what you are suggesting. My way of life is being threatened, and I'm going to have to change what I But yeah, I totally agree with that point of imagination and that point of like opportunity or optimism, or if you did this, look how cool it would be. You know, I'm trying to present that. It doesn't mean I'm not still getting people in my inbox saying, don't take my dog away, which is not what we're trying to do. But I totally agree with that. And I feel like that's the best way to try and tell those stories to those groups of people who have lived a certain way for decades and decades or generations, showing them that it would actually be really cool news if we did these tiny changes that won't threaten your tradition or your way of life, but still make a difference.
Either of you want to jump in on that?
I think imagination is like an essential piece to our storytelling. I don't think that people would read a story to the end or watch a video to the end if they didn't feel like, hey, I can actually make a difference as a step to a better world. So I think it's really important that we paint that picture. Hey, these are the steps that you can take. You're not powerless. Use your imagination. Think of a better future. That's a really essential part of our storytelling.
Yeah, and to just add briefly, I think it's really interesting to see, like, what if 1 in 10 people made this wedge, or like 2 people made this wedge, how will that look like? And then maybe showcasing that in some way. I do a lot of animations and illustrations, so this was actually like a story I wanted to work on, is what happens when 1 in 10 people make this wedge, and then maybe like try to illustrate something, imaginative.
Well, we are out of time. I want to thank all 3 of you. This has been really fun, really engaging, and thank you all. Just a point of housekeeping, we'll have a 10-minute break, so please get some coffee, get a donut, take a nature break if you need to, and then be back here in 10 minutes. We will get started with our second panel. Thank you very much. All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the second session on COP30 and what we might expect. For the first time, the annual climate conference, COP30, or Conference of the Parties, is going to be held in the Amazon in Belém, Brazil, in November. And there's a lot of hoopla around this, and understandably so, right? This is going to be held, this important climate conference is going to be held in a place that helps regulate the climate, which is the Amazon. So a lot of the hoopla is definitely deserved, but there are a lot of questions also about what may come out of it. We are at a moment where the United States has pulled out of the Paris Agreement, making global cooperation around climate more difficult. And there are a lot of questions about Brazil itself, about Brazil's leadership, about where Brazil wants to take the country. It's already a major oil country, and the president is pushing to do more drilling, including in areas of the Amazon, which of course go against all kinds of international goals of moving away from fossil fuels. So there's a lot to sort out. I've got a great panelist here to help me sort all this out. Seth Borenstein and Melina Whaling are reporters, climate reporters with AP and have covered COPs. Kat Clark is the Global Communications Manager for the Climate and Land Use Alliance. And Diego Cases is the Program Director of Climate Emergency Collaboration Group. Welcome to you all. Seth, I want to start this question with you because you've covered a number of COPs. Do you know how many that you've covered?
I think this will be 7 or 8.
7 or 8, okay. Certainly more than anybody else at AP. COPs are this kind of unique thing. For people who haven't been or maybe watching, what is a Conference of the Parties? Can you just kind of paint a picture for people?
Sure. It's 2 or 3 things at the same time. You have the main idea of a Conference of the Parties, which is negotiations. So you have teams from every country, 195 countries. And then you have activists, you have businesses, you have agencies, and so it is sort of a convention with 2 or 3 side conventions around it, and it has grown tremendously. While it wasn't technically the first COP, the founding of the United Nations Framework for Climate Convention was in Brazil in 1992 with the Rio Earth Summit, and so in a way that's come full circle. But it has become sort of, in a way, a trade convention for both businesses and activists, scientists, with diplomacy almost to the side.
Somewhere in there. Okay, we're gonna get into that. So my next question for anybody on the panel is to give a sense, if you could, what is COP30 going to be about? And let me preface this by saying, I think when you go into COPs, most of the time, you have some sense of what it's going to be. I remember COP27 in Egypt was very much focused on loss and damage, right? This idea that the Western world, developed countries, should pay to compensate for past harm from carbon dioxide. COP28 in Dubai, very much at naming for the first time the culprit of climate change, which of course is the burning of fossil fuels. And then last year, just to sum up, COP29 was all about, in Azerbaijan, was all about climate finance, right? How are we going to pay for this transition? What's the shorthand for COP30? Kat, do you want to take that?
I can speak to that.
Okay.
It's going to be all the F's this year. So it's going to be forests. It's going to be sited in a tropical rainforest, or at least at the gateway to the Amazon, which is incredibly important. Fossil fuels, the debate is still there on how we phase down fossil fuels, and then climate finance. 1.3 trillion is up for discussion as to how that is going to be contributed to and brought to developing nations, and that's going to be a very hot topic. So all the F's.
All the F's. That's good. That's good shorthand. Melina or Diego, anything to add on that?
I mean, for me, is the COP of just transition. I mean, we've been talking for 30 years about how do we make the transition away from fossil fuels. Like recently in Dubai, in the COP28, we named it the issue are fossil fuels. We need to transition away from this. We name it that we need to reach zero deforestation, but we're still debating like, how are we going to do this? Like, what about the workers? What about the youth? What about the women? What about the indigenous peoples? So a huge piece of negotiation in this COP is about just transition. Like, what is the political signal that this COP needs to give to the rest of the world about how we're going to be transitioning away from this whole economy?
Yeah, I have a couple more F's to add. I cover agriculture, but food we were obviously talking about. I think I'm seeing a lot more talking about agriculture. If we're thinking about deforestation, you know, food is one of the drivers of deforestation in the Amazon. So definitely have been seeing that coming up. And then the other one being free speech and thinking about, you know, I've done some reporting with kids, activists who are really, really excited since last year that this is going to be potentially an opportunity to, you know, make their voices heard. Of course, we've already done some reporting on the housing situation there, and I know there's some questions about how much people are going to be able to really rally there, but I would be really excited to see those kids that I talked to last year get to have their big activism moment.
And the problem with that is this was designed in a way sort of to be what they had hoped would be the People's COP. You know, one of the reasons for them, not just the Amazon, but if you listen to the Brazilian government, they say they want to show not just the glitz or show off the country, but introduce, especially to negotiators, the people who are hurt by climate change and deforestation, and make it more about less privilege and underside. The trouble is, because of housing issues and because expense and lack of housing, many people won't be able to go to the People's COP.
Well, we're going to get to that. Hold that. We're going to talk all about some of the accommodation issues. But yeah, I think that is something that is coming. I would add to what you guys said, the Fs, I would add a P, and that is protests. I think we're going to see protests at this COP in a way that we haven't seen in a number of years. If you think about where the last 3 COPs were, particularly Azerbaijan, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, these are not countries where it's easy to protest. And we saw how hard it was for people to protest. They'd have to get special permit and they'd be off like in the corner somewhere. It wasn't none of these were real protests, and I think you're going to see a return to that. In one of my previous jobs, I worked in Brazil. I was the bureau chief for AP there, and Brazil is a very vibrant, expressive, communicative place, and people protest. So you're going to see them. All right, you touched on something, the People's COP, Seth, and I want to build on that. Because of where this COP is, we do expect, you know, a lot of indigenous groups to participate, and it may be more than at any other COP. Particularly around South America. So my question is, what does that look like in the actual debates, the policy? Like, Kat, start us off on that. What's that look like?
Yeah, so it is hard to understate the importance of Indigenous representation at the COP. And just to sort of set the scene for that, we are expecting between 3,000 and 5,000 Indigenous people to come to this COP. With accreditation held for around 1,000 Indigenous participants. So it is super important. And for folks who are interested in really kind of understanding what the Indigenous movement is asking for at the COP, there's a very important campaign called The Answer Is Us, specifically because it's proven that Indigenous people have much lower rates of deforestation on their lands than on lands outside of their traditional territories. So they're literally saying the answer to climate change in these beautiful carbon sinks that we have as tropical forests is us, the Indigenous peoples. Within that, specifically, they are asking for much clearer land rights, so actual official territories being demarcated and then formally titled as theirs. They're asking for direct climate finance, so climate finance to flow to Indigenous peoples, not through intermediaries, and a number of other key things that would help make lasting impact, not just at COP, but beyond that for decades onwards and potentially centuries.
Diego, yeah, you want to add to that?
I actually want to connect with something, the last question in the last panel about the imagination, right? Because I feel like that's what these protests can really help this COP be. Like, the indigenous peoples, the youth that are organizing around the People's Summit and other activities that are going to happen before and during the COP can really help us really stretch the limits of the political imagination. I think that's what we need right now. Like, ask ourselves, okay, we have the challenge of transition away from fossil fuels. How can we do that and really stretch the possibilities of this? Because Brazil, for example, keeps saying that, oh, we cannot do it. They're like common but differentiated responsibilities. We need to go at our own pace. But the protests will actually put that question in the center of the discussion and say, okay, how far can we go? How quick can we go? And that's precisely what I think that this protest can do in this COP. Stretch the limits of our political imagination. Like, we need to think about things different, right?
Melina,
Yeah, I'll just add, I reported recently on a study about how it connected indigenous peoples of formerly recognized territories and actually protecting communities outside of the Amazon from various health impacts, both related to wildfire smoke impacts on things like cardiovascular issues, and then also on infectious diseases. And it was an exciting study because they were kind of formally linking this recognition of indigenous territory with human health for all of us. And I think that just like speaks to the importance of, it's not just about indigenous people, and obviously it's so important to be thinking about that, but this has implications for all of us around the world. And so it'll be really exciting to see whether countries recognize that.
Yeah, do you have something to add?
I was just gonna say,
yeah.
Part of me is the cynic of having done this many times.
It's okay.
And watching COP presidencies love to pay lip service to protests to indigenous people. But I think this is where there's that chance to be different in the last few years, because the power in these is the power of the COP presidency, which is the power of the host nation. For example, last year in Azerbaijan, we saw the head of Azerbaijan in his welcoming remarks talk about how wonderful oil and gas is. And even though Brazil is a much bigger oil and gas nation than Azerbaijan, and even bigger in many respects than the UAE, it's the politics of Lula, and thus the COP30 presidency in Ambassador Delago, that may make a difference. So there's sort of the inherent lip service, but there's that good chance that this administration will actually make it do something more than lip service.
You mentioned Lula, and that's a great segue to the next question that I want to bring up. So the President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, is a really interesting figure. Politically, I think by far probably the most important figure in sort of Brazilian modern politics for a lot of reasons. But the one that I want to talk about is that he fashions himself as an environmentalist. And some of his policies really do speak to that. At the same time, he fashions himself, and he says, as a pragmatist. And he has supported for years and continues to support more drilling, more oil drilling, including in the Amazon. And I've watched this for years. I know Diego, Kat, you guys have too. I remember a couple of years ago at COP when it was just announced that Brazil, this was interesting, Brazil was going to be part of OPEC Plus, right? Yeah. I mean, here we're at this climate conference, and Lula really tried to put a good spin on it. It's like, well, we need to be involved. We need to have oil companies, part of the table, at the table, all this. How's this going to play out, Diego, on the international stage? I mean, I know in Brazil there's kind of a, acceptance of this middle ground.
Yeah, I think the social licensing for oil in Brazil is pretty high. Like, people really think that our oil company, Petrobras, is a vector of social inclusion and economic growth in the country. So it's really hard to challenge that. When you mentioned that thing that Lula said, they're going to join OPEC Plus, I was actually in the room when he said that in COP28 in Dubai, and it was such a disappointment from everyone in the group. Like when we heard that, I think that in order to answer that question, we need to think about the domestic political dynamics in Brazil as well. Like, this government is not, it's a coalition government. So we need to understand that there are many forces that are actually pushing towards that direction. So he wants to be an environmentalist. Like, we see the results in terms of deforestation, for example, going down. Like, that's very concrete, for sure.
Right.
In terms of like water management, in terms of like, there are several things in the climate arena that I think we can say we have progress, but we need to understand that the political dynamics in the country are pushing Brazil to keep drilling for oil. And I think it's like that in every country, but we never actually acknowledge that. So we think that the countries that are hosting a COP, they come with a firm position, a unified position, but that's like rarely true, honestly. Like, so what we're seeing in this case is that it's just more evident that lack of unity in Brazil is creating that challenge. And interestingly enough, yesterday I was at the Brazilian consulate in a meeting with the First Lady, and she was saying how difficult it was for Brazil to actually, champion this issue of transition away from fossil fuels because of all the social benefits that oil brings to us. So in the end, I guess we need to hold the contradiction together, like both the good and the bad, and see like how we can, chart a way out of this. And definitely the answer is not going to come from Brazil alone. So we need to approach this in a more collective way.
Does anybody have anything to add on that? No?
There's only one country that is not drilling for oil. I mean, basically has just joined a non-proliferation treaty. So this is so universal except for Colombia.
Right.
It's just Brazil gets the attention because the attention's there now.
Yeah.
But UK did this too.
Yeah. And to be fair, when you dig into the politics of it and you dig into the economics and the actual emissions, what Brazilian officials will say, I've heard Marina Silva say this, I've seen Lula say this, is like, look, Brazil has done its part, right? Brazil is doing its part for the world. We're taking care of the Amazon, lowering deforestation. Yes, we are exporting oil that the rest of the world, a lot of the world uses, but look at our own power consumption, right? We use a lot of hydropower. It's a major hydropower country. So it's a nuanced thing. It's very complicated, but I think for a lot of people it just sounds like more drilling, more drilling, and I think that's going to be a central conversation. You mentioned a little bit earlier participation. And one of the groups, countries that's not going to be participating in any big way is the United States. I wonder if you could, Seth, take this one on first. What does that mean when the US is not part of a COP? You've covered COPs without the US.
Yeah, well, and they've been done. It's happened. A lot depends on what this Trump administration is a little different than the first one, is how absent they want to be. And there's been talk just this week of withdrawing from the entire UNFCCC process.
Explain
okay,
that
the
for people
UNFCCC, United Nations Framework for Climate Convention. So right now the US is withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, but the process set up in Rio in 1992 is the underpinning. And if the US withdraws from that, then there's all sorts of other things such as reporting and things like that they don't have to do. But they can withdraw from the Paris Treaty and still be part of negotiations. And given that in all these negotiations, they are done by consensus, which is almost unanimity, that's sort of the pretense. What happens often is COP presidents don't see certain countries sometimes, but they can't not see the United States. And they can't not see Saudi Arabia. Well, actually they have, but other states, they've not seen Russia. They've not seen Nicaragua. But the US has that ability to say no. And if the US is out, then they don't have that ability to say no and pull everything to a halt. That's why Saudi Arabia is still in the process. They had that ability to slow things down in the negotiations and then stop things. It's sort of cutting off your nose to spite your face. You're losing a big negotiation tool.
Yeah, and other people can fill that gap, right? I mean, China can show much more leadership on climate. Europe can.
And they have already.
And they have. Melina, were you going to say something?
I was maybe just going to add some color for anybody who has never been to one, but it was my first time covering it last year, and I left the US the day after the election, and I had never been to one, and I can just say that the mood It was very apparent, even to me, like coming into this space. So I think like maybe hopefully that just illustrates for folks that the US does matter. Of course, I think being from the US, sometimes you can get this framework of we're the only ones that matter, and that's not true either, but it definitely affected the mood last year for sure.
Yeah, no, I remember that COP happened right after Trump, won re-election, and John Podesta, who was the climate envoy for the U.S., really tried to put, a positive spin on it, like, it's not going to slow things down, and green transition is happening. But if you sat in any of those rooms, it was like a balloon that had been deflated, at least the first few days. Kat or Diego, anything to add on Trump?
I mean, for me, what we need to really watch out for is like who are going to be the proxy countries working for the U.S. during that meeting. Like, I'm not going to name countries here, but we know for a fact that there are alliances and coalitions of governments who work together to stall things. And the U.S., much like Brazil as well, has their allies, like have countries that will work towards like stopping several items of the negotiation, even though they have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement and it will not be in the room necessarily. So I think the way to mitigate this that I've seen the Brazilian government do is making a gesture. Like yesterday, for example, during the United Nations, President Lula again said that President Trump hadn't misunderstood Brazil, and asking the U.S. to continue the dialogue, that conversation. Today, actually, like President Lula is taking the stage, and then President Trump is taking the stage at the UN headquarters as well, like to say this. And we will expect, like we're expecting kind of that gesture again coming from Lula to say like, come to the table, let's talk. Whether the U.S. will accept that invitation, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I want to move to, maybe we'll call it one of the elephants in the room with COP, and that is the accommodation situation. Many stories have been written, including by AP, about how expensive it is in hotels, makeshift accommodations. There's been all kinds of stories about love motels being, turned into accommodations. And the reality is, and I've been in Belém, it's a big, fast-moving city, but it doesn't have the infrastructure of Sao Paulo or Rio or other places. Lula wanted to put it there for a lot of the reasons that we've discussed. And so my question is, is this really a big deal? Is it gonna hurt participation? Or will this be forgotten once it starts? Because I think we should be clear too, what comes out of a COP is much more important than whether all of us, including the journalists, here on the stage, if we have like a nice place to stay and we can afford it, right? That's, so what, so what, right? A little bit, right? The most important thing is the COP, but could this impact COP? The drop in participation? Because I think we're going to see it. There's no question.
I mean, I think who it's going to hurt is the young folks, the indigenous folks, the folks from countries with lower budgets. I talked for a story that we worked on with a woman who spent over $40,000 of her own savings to basically put down deposits on housing so that young people could get there. Because the truth is, young people don't have the same resources and they don't have the same connections. And she thought it was important for them to be able to get there. So I think that's who it's going to hurt.
Kat, it looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think this is a tricky question and a tricky situation because, on the one hand, there is a very real discussion around whether less affluent countries can even afford accommodation in Belém at the moment, and with negotiating teams who are meant to be coming on behalf of their governments not having secured accommodation yet. So that is a genuine concern to the actual negotiations themselves.
Yeah.
And as Seth and Melina's story this week pointed out also, youth participation, independent journalism, key elements of civil society also can't necessarily afford either the accommodation or the logistics it takes to get there. I think that the flip side to that is that there has been over the past year something of a sort of condescending or sort of patronizing style of reporting on, can Belém handle this? Look at the garbage in the streets and the lack of proper sewage systems. Kind of an ongoing scrutiny of Brazil and Belém in a way that wouldn't happen if this weren't a country in the global south, and it wouldn't happen if it weren't a city that wasn't kind of the major infrastructure or sort of the mega city that everyone expects to be able to fly directly to. So we have to balance the can the negotiations happen in the full vibrancy that they ought to, with full participation, with are we being patronizing of a global south country that is really trying to do something very symbolic by hosting these negotiations at the heart of the Amazon, at the gateway to the Amazon, sorry.
Yeah, please.
I mean, we have a saying in our team that logistics is politics, right? So logistics is always politics, especially when it comes to a COP. So the city that you decide to host the COP, like the venue that you decide to host the COP, they all will influence in the design of the negotiations, in the ability of people to organize their own events, and so on and so forth. I think what we're seeing is a lack of like sensitivity from the Brazilian government to really understand other countries, and especially African countries, Latin American countries, and others who don't really have the financial capacity to afford any of this. So they don't really listen to their counterparts. So that's also a diplomatic failure in that sense. And I think that there is also, if we take a step back, an assumption that I'm hearing a lot in our rhetoric that COPs need to be smaller, right? But again, the feedback that I gave to the Brazilians once was like, are you really entitled to make that decision of who comes to the COP or not? Because in the end, we're living in a climate crisis. Everybody has a skin in the game. Everybody wants to go and fight for their own future. So like in the end, the logistics becomes politics because people are there to fight for their future, right? So I think this could impact the COP. I think this could impact the mental health of people in the COP. Like it is not an easy thing. Like negotiators, they usually spend 12 to 15 hours every day working. I mean, I was in the biodiversity COP in Colombia like last year, speaking with one of the negotiators from the DRC, and he literally said like, I wake up at 7 a.m. and I go until 11 p.m. every day. Like, and that's a biodiversity COP that's much smaller. Like right. In the climate COP, I think we're gonna see like by the second week, teams that are literally like exhausted. And that's not good for politics, that's not good for the negotiation.
And that's exactly right, because I mean, remember, these people who are negotiating, they are people. So I look at two COPs that are as polar opposite as can be. The 2009 Copenhagen COP, it was considered a disaster. It was,
I was there, it was a disaster.
It was a disaster.
And say why it's a disaster,
because nothing came out of it. Actually, in the end, though, there are many who will say its failure reset everything, which made it possible for the Paris. But the Paris COP and the Copenhagen COP are almost polar opposites in what they accomplished. And part of it is you had Paris, this beautiful city that world city people love, with food that was wonderful, and you had fat, happy, well-fed delegates who were literally dancing in the evenings in the hallway, compared to Copenhagen, where it was dark from the moment you got up to the moment you left, and I don't mean to say it, but the food was not. The mood in that place was just different, and on top of that, you always get, when you get 50, 60, 70, 100,000 people crammed into one place, even before the pandemics, you get disease, COP crud. And that happens all the time. And now, one of the housing solutions is to put people on cruise ships. Well, what happens on cruise ships? You get sick, rotavirus. I mean, this is one of the predictions I'm going to make, is that you're going to have some major sickness issues. And, sick delegates aren't happy delegates.
No.
And happy delegates are what make things work.
Yeah, a lot to weigh, definitely, for the leadership to put it in Belém. I mean, when you think about participation, I do think it's worth pointing out it is going to be harder for people who are coming on a plane, traveling far, but Belém is connected to the Amazon, and the Amazon is filled with indigenous peoples, and a lot of people are going to be able to get there on bus, or even walking, or on riverboats and stuff. So that will give more access than it would have for those people in Rio. They're not going to get to Rio. They're not going to get to Sao Paulo.
Sorry, Peter. And on that,
yes.
mean, to the credit of the indigenous movement, there is a significant there's a significant number of people from the indigenous movement who intend to camp at Belém, which is not unusual. I mean, this is not a, we can't get hotels, therefore, this is not unusual with indigenous mobilizations. There's one every year in Brasilia where they camp for quite some time. But I mean, we talk about imagination. I mean, that is a beautiful solution to making sure that participation happens.
Okay. I got so many more questions, but I think we're going to leave it there so that we have some time for questions from the audience. And this time I want to have people come up to the podium and ask your question just so that people on the stream can actually hear the question. So you want to come on up? Why don't people who want to ask questions, if you just maybe come up here and just line up. If I hope you're not the only question. I think there'll probably be more questions.
I can keep going.
No, please, yeah, please, okay.
Hi, I'm Allison from World Resources Institute. I've been to many of the COPs with Seth and Melina. And I'm interested in the role of communications around the COP. So much of the speak is so technical, so difficult to relate to. And so many of the announcements, which we cover sort of breathlessly, we're so excited about them, have not been followed through, right? The commitments are sort of sitting there on the table and we're not seeing really any follow through. So I'm just wondering from like a media perspective, from a comms perspective, like what should we be doing about this gap where it's sort of very technical, very difficult to follow, and then we're so excited about it and we communicate it to the world like breakthroughs, and then nothing really comes through from it. And then we move on to the next topic.
I'll start with that one. Thank you for the question. One of our central things that we try to do on the climate team is tell stories in as plain a language as possible because of that problem, right? Because some of these things are very technical. And if you cover climate change, you need to know these things. You need to know the science. But if you're communicating climate change, you need to know how to translate that so that people can actually understand it. So I guess I would say, you know, the two journalists on this stage do a great job at that. I, as the editor, am always kind of banging on about this, and they'll hear me, and they'll say, this is wonky, or you can't say it like this. So it's something that we're very conscious of. In terms of keeping people honest, we do, throughout COPs, do stories looking at what has happened, you know, in the last year. What has happened since this thing was promised, whether it's how much climate finance has actually come to the table a year after Azerbaijan, or where are the levels of emissions 2 years after COP28, where, you know, we got the decision that we were going to phase out, move away from fossil fuels. I don't know if anybody has anything to add to.
Oh, sorry.
No, go.
I was just going to say, I think that is part of the case for us reporting on this and being there, even if maybe it doesn't get as much engagement, is we have to have some eyes on it and be holding people accountable. And the only way we can do that is by continuing to watch the people in power and writing that down.
And Allison, you guys do it probably better than most any other group out there. You have people who translate it more than we do, and before we have to, which is good. But two things I would like from communications professionals at COP. One, not only bring us the issues, but from the last panel you heard Peter talk about real people. And it's so hard in COP to bring real people in this. But if you have real people who we could reach out to who may not be in Belém or wherever the next COP is, that we could reach out to illustrate, to bring it home so it is not just wonkiness. And then on the other side, on holding accountable, spreadsheets and data. You know, the climate team has an incredible data specialist, M.K. Wilderman, who's not here, but we work with all the time. You know, give us an excuse to do it. Give us spreadsheets, and we'll have fun.
Give us the goods, please, yeah, come on up. Well, you want to come? Oh, no, it's okay. Go ahead. Yeah, he'll come next.
Line up.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Paula, I work for Browning Environmental Communications. I would love to hear your thoughts about the separation at this year's COP between sort of Belém and the negotiations, and then the private sector and all sorts of other stuff going on in Sao Paulo and elsewhere. That feels very different to previous COPs. Thank you.
Diego, sure?
I mean, there's so many things happening right at the same time. You got artists convening in the northeast of Brazil like days before the COP. You've got the mayors convening in Rio on like November 5 or 6. You've got the Principle for Responsible Investments in São Paulo. You've got Bloomberg also doing a big business convening in São Paulo before the COP. Another unique thing in this year is that they moved the world leaders segment to before the COP itself. So it's going to be like, I think 7, 8, or 6 or 7
6, 7,
November.
yeah.
And that will actually give a bit of time for world leaders to come to Belém and then leave Belém, so not creating an extra logistical challenge for the city as well. Because imagine you have a COP plus, I don't know how many world leaders, like that would be a nightmare. I think that actually connects really well with the first question, because I feel like our ability to tell that story of what is Belém like the days before, but also what happens after Belém is the right measure for me. Like, we need to be able to see the geopolitical context, tell that story. We need to be able to see the individual stories of people who are going to Belém to fight for their own future, and really like take advantage of these other events to pinpoint and highlight stories that matter for the average, people. Honestly, like for some people, it matters more to hear what their mayors are saying in Rio than what negotiators are saying in Belém. So like highlighting those stories, it's a way to actually connect people with the broader discussion.
Let's have you come. One last question.
Great panel. Hi, my name is Jason Toei, PhD at Stanford. Just my question kind of is, with COPs, I feel like a lot of times, a lot of the headlines that the general public sees is a lot of the negative stuff. So like, let's say my friends who have nothing to do in climate all know about the rainforest, kind of potentially getting cut down, this housing, all these things. And I want to know, how do we still navigate tell stories that talk about some of the challenges, but still interweave some of the benefits? So I guess just generally like being able to produce, a truthful story, but one that's not just overly negative, because I will say those ones have been getting a lot of times the most impressions and clicks and links and things like that.
Melina, why don't you? I thought of you.
Yeah, I think one of the most beautiful things about COP, and kind of my impression last year, was just seeing this amazing gathering of people from all over the world. It's really just incredible. And so I know AP has done coverage. I did a story last year about tea culture in Azerbaijan, and tea is being affected by climate change like many other crops around the world. But it was really cool because they had this at the pavilion, you got to see kind of the traditional tea culture and how they serve that at meals. And it was really beautiful to talk to, some of the folks who helped in organizing that COP and hearing what it meant to them personally. So I think as much as it is such a challenging thing to cover, I think leaning into those moments of intercultural connection and yeah, it is beautiful. It's beautiful to see, even as, it's hard to see too sometimes, I think, but there are beautiful parts of it.
Kat?
Yeah, and I think looking for the good news stories this year, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the sort of major finance initiative that Lulu is putting on the table with the Tropical Forests Forever facility. He is looking with other tropical forest countries to raise $125 billion that will be turned into a market mechanism that will literally pay tropical forest countries to keep their forests standing. And so when we're looking for those kind of glimmers of hope, actually some of them this year sit outside of the formal negotiating agenda, but they are definitely there.
Diego?
I mean, I think this COP is in Belém is a microcosmos of what's happening everywhere in the world, right? And one story, a positive story that I feel like could be highlighted, is the resistance and the resilience of the people in the Amazon. Like, these people are facing international organized crime, they're facing oil companies, mining companies, deforestation industry, all of that, and still they're showing up, right? And I think the story of like showing up to climate change is one story that we need to highlight more and more and more, because there's so much out there that tells a different story for us. Like, there's so much that is telling us to give up. And I think that that story of resistance and resilience, for me, it's a very positive story and really inspiring and keeps my hope alive. And yeah.
And no one
Take us home.
No one in this COP or any COP has given up hope. They're all there with what Kaylee calls agency, because they think they wouldn't come, whether it's resistance, indigenous peoples, or youth activists, or even the negotiators, even the business interests. None of them would be there if they didn't think they could do something. So everyone there has hope. Even though what they're talking about may seem so doomish, everyone there has hope. And what we need to do is point that out.
Tell great stories. That's all the time that we have. I want to thank all of you, Seth, Melina, Kat, Diego. This was a lot of fun. And we'll keep the conversation going. Again, another 10 minutes for coffee, donuts, head to the bathroom. And then we'll be back at 11 o'clock. So thank you all. Thank you very much. All right, welcome back, everybody. This will be our third and final panel, but one I'm super excited about, and I think you will be too, once you start listening to some of the people that are on stage with me. I think generally we can say, and we brought this up in some of the panels earlier, climate stories are hard to get people to engage in, right? A lot of people just disconnect from climate change in general. Some of the best people of breaking through and telling really strong stories about climate, getting people to pay attention, are not scientists, they're not politicians, and sometimes they're not journalists. Sometimes some of the best storytellers are content creators who are reaching audiences in new ways, and I have 4 of them on stage with me today. Jacob Simon, Sage Linier, Josh Klein, and Summer Dean. To give you guys a sense of the work that they do, we have a short video.
Wondering what climate content creators are talking about? Let's take a look.
Yes, the world is breaking, but it's also being rebuilt. And if we don't participate in the rebuilding, we lose the right to complain about how it turns out.
Check out how much hotter it gets in New York City right when you walk off the train.
For the first and only time, it's the end of August 2025, and here's 10 things that went right. High-speed rail finally came to the U.S., with the nation's fastest train now going 160 miles per hour from D.C. to Boston. 40 new species were discovered in a huge underwater canyon in Argentina, including a sea star that looks like Patrick from SpongeBob.
Did you know that moss just goes to sleep when it's faced with stressful or unfavorable conditions? Moss is like nature's sponge. They need lots of water and moisture to thrive. And they do not do well with dryness. Kind of like my curly hair. So when they experience changes in their environment, like drought or dry, hot summers, they go dormant.
These are just a few voices helping shape the climate conversation. What's in your feed?
All right. Yeah, no, it's good stuff, and I encourage everybody to spend some time looking at the work that they do. Let's get into it. Sage, while an undergrad at Berkeley, you began teaching a course on solutions. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about and what bridge that perhaps gave to some of the work that you do today?
Oh, is this? Okay, it's working. Might be a little quiet.
Maybe
Can you hear me
pull
okay?
up the level. I can hear you now.
Okay. I think that we do need to focus on solutions as the narrative that we put forward. The climate movement or the environmental movement since the 70s has done a really good job at sounding the alarm, but we left the general public with a sense of alarm or danger without a real plan forward. When everyday people hear from us, it generally is this we're doomed, there's nothing you can do, like overwhelming sort of narrative, and that doesn't empower people to lean in or try and find agency. And I also think there are other industries like the business world, finance, tech, who have really done a good job at building personalities and role models out of the leaders in their space. And that has given them sort of this like hype machine that we just don't have over here on the side of the people who are trying to make the world better. And so focusing on the solutions as just truly the right way to engage people and get people excited about what we can do and what a better world can look like. I think that's really the only narrative we should move forward with.
Okay. Jack, you moved to New York a couple of years ago, right, from Ohio, and you noticed right away that it was hot in the subways. Tell us what happened next.
Yeah, so born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, lived in Chicago for a long time, lived in San Francisco in 2023, moved here like a year and a half ago, more or less. And yeah, I lived in Ridgewood at the time, but was commuting to Hell's Kitchen to get to work. And I mean, as everyone knows, the subway station's not only hot, they're very humid. We live in a subtropical climate at this point. The air is bad, it's loud. So I was just kind of experiencing this every day along with the rest of the commuters. And just from like a curious mindset, it's like, okay, something just popped in my head one day to grab one of like the digital thermometer guns that we used during COVID and just start like pointing at random objects in the subway stations at Union Square 14th Street, which is where I transferred a lot, and just kind of film myself doing it and put it on TikTok, which at the time I was remiss to make a TikTok, but here we are. And that gained like a very viral response among New Yorkers. People tell me like, go to the elevator on 181st Street, one station, check out how hot it is, or like, you know, check out my station. And like kind of these comments where it turned like a public archive of how commuters feel about our public infrastructure and like people airing their grievances. And like it was a really cool kind of forum for, you know, how we feel that may not be available on other, you know, platforms. So that sort of translated into me, okay, well this went viral in 2024. It's a temporal issue, right? Now we're not really thinking about it anymore because it's gone away, right? But it's gonna come back next year again and much worse. How can I prepare myself for 2025 somewhere to sort of take advantage of that? And so really this whole year I've been thinking, okay, what can I do to, you know, really tap into that sentiment again? So I've like developed a sensor network that I've installed in a lot of high traffic foot stations within Manhattan to collect the first long-term data set around heat and humidity in our subway station, and really use it as the bedrock for starting conversations. So what was a creative project in last year is now turned into a much more serious undertaking, talking to researchers, scientists, engineers, policymakers, talked to a lot of city council members. I had a conversation with someone who worked at the MTA last week and starting to get real stakeholders involved for trying to figure out, as you said, solutions, right? This is not about gaining Instagram followers. It's about working the ways in which we can start working towards solutions and really thinking from an outside perspective as a commuter and not so deep in it as someone who's working with the MTA. It's like, what can we do to find solutions? So I'm like on that path as we speak.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more of some of the things you're doing. Summer, your first jobs out of college were really research, right? Looking at policy, climate policy, environmental policy, and green energy, and then you made the jump to climate storytelling. Talk a little bit about that transition and how you did it.
Yeah, so before I graduated college, when I was getting my degree in environmental science, taking the jump from like high school to undergrad in environmental science, it can be very depressing and just give you a lot of anxiety. Learning just how much we're destroying our ecosystems and our planet. And at the time, I was one of the only, if very few women of color in my degree and in my field. So I just felt very lonely, so I started this blog called Climate Diva, and it was really, at the time, just for myself, as a place for me to air out my anxieties and just talk about the things that were just making me sad, honestly, about the destruction of our planet. And I had no followers at the time. It was just really a page for me to write. And then after I graduated, I was working in climate science, working deep in the lab, doing atmospheric modeling. And I just kind of felt dissatisfied doing that work. And it was around the same time of when Trump was president the first time, and he took us out of the Paris Agreement. And I just remember feeling like scientists were being completely unheard, and just feeling like, what was the point of us doing all of this incredibly important research if the stories aren't being told, and if people aren't being just inspired to take action, and if there's no sense of invoking creativity and awe about our planet amongst the public. And storytelling and writing is always something I've loved to do. But I never really thought that I could do this as a career until COVID started, which is when I'm sure a lot of us started our platforms. And my first video on TikTok was completely unrelated to environmentalism. I think I did some sort of Ariana Grande impression or something. I was just joking around. And the video got 3 million views. And I was like, okay, if this is the attention I'm gonna get on TikTok, I'm just gonna talk about climate and environmental issues. So that's kind of how it all started. And it's morphed into this whole environmental platform. Where, yeah, I really focus on storytelling to just inspire creativity and awe, and just be that first point of contact for people into caring about our planet.
Okay. Jacob, I think it's fair to say your first career, I mean, you were in high school, but you were a figure skater, right? You were on Team USA, and digging into your background and stuff, I think when you were on Team USA, you started blogging, right? You started doing some front camera stuff for the team. And then in college, you start writing a blog or a newsletter on positive stories, and that has morphed into video, and you're going to talk more about that. But my question for you is, you really focus on the positive, right? And if you watch some of his feeds, they start with, if you need to cleanse your feed, or here's why the future will be better, right? Why positive?
Yeah, it's funny when I tell people I retired at 21, they're like, what are you talking about? So my background was not in climate. I was a full-time athlete, and then I was studying communications and media part-time on the side at university. And then when I got injured, I dislocated my shoulder. I full-time was studying communications and media. And then I graduated, and I was working as a copywriter, and I just had a passion for the environment. I was living in Colorado, fell in love with the natural world. And as I was taking these environmental courses, I was very quickly overwhelmed and just had this looming sense of doom and dread, like so many people do. And my classmates I could see around me were quite depressed, and it was hard for us to stay motivated. And we were taking these courses as adults, like choosing to focus on this and study this, and we're clearly dedicated to trying to find climate solutions. And I figured if we were experiencing these feelings, how about someone that's not already involved? Like, it must be so much worse that if all we're consuming is negativity, why would someone get involved? Do you feel like it's too late? Of course, things can always get better or things can get worse. So I figured if I can highlight solutions and people stepping up to solve their community problems and things along those lines, then I can motivate more people to follow in their footsteps, both support these projects that I'm highlighting and then also do some of their own. So it really stemmed from a personal need. I was very overwhelmed, and I figured if I spent a few hours every day looking for stuff going right in the world, it would help me stay motivated and continue to hopefully work in the environment for my whole life and second career. And I also started sending it to my fellow classmates, other students in the courses. They really resonated with it. So then it extended to friends and family, and then strangers. And then, as you mentioned, with the explosion of short form video, I figured I'm already doing the research, basically writing a script. Why don't I try and just walk around and make a basic video on what I'm already doing? And the video format just exploded way beyond what the newsletter was having. And I figured reaching different mediums, I still run the newsletter today, but the reach of video is just far surpassing that. But it's nice to meet people where they are and just try and provide a breath of fresh air and remind us that it is worth taking action still. Like, it's worth doing something from small to big, whatever you're able to. And I really try and provide that like a community feeling of so many people doing so many great things. There's no reason why you, the consumer, can't follow in those footsteps.
Okay. A question for all of you. You all are telling stories. You all have sizable followings online, and you're all making a living, right, in this work. I see a lot of parallels to journalism in the stories that you're telling. And I wonder if I could ask each one of you to just reflect a little bit, like how you see your work in relation to journalism. Similarities, differences. Summer, what if we start with you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we do where we kind of work in tandem. I definitely don't see myself as a journalist, but I think the main difference that I often think about is that in today's era, so many people are distrusting of these mainstream media platforms and journalism platforms. On the political right and left, people are just very untrusting of these platforms. And so I think our superpower as creators is that we form some sort of bond or parasocial bond with the people who follow us, to where they have a level of trust with us that I don't think is the same with mainstream journalism. And so I don't take that lightly. I really feel like the people who follow me, we all feel like a huge community. And they can see what's going on in my day-to-day life, and then like every day they see a video pop up on their feed of me sharing some climate study or sharing some climate research in a fun and accessible way. So I think that's the main difference, is like just a different level of trust and intimacy that people can have. But we definitely need to work in tandem, and both are very, very important.
Okay. And something you said, it made me think of what you said, Jacob, of you were interested in sharing these stories because you wanted to feel better, right? And I think that comes across in content creation of when there's real authenticity, right? Like you're not doing this for some other reason. You're doing this because you really believe it, and that comes across. So maybe you next to think about journalism and where you fit?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, people come to trust me, and if I'm saying things that aren't authentic, my audience will know, and they won't consume my content as much. They won't care about what I have to say. I take a journalistic approach to a bunch of the content I make, where I'm covering stories a lot of the time by AP, and I'm trying to get people to care about them and more people to kind of consume the content that's being written and reported. And I almost try and trick them into caring a little bit. I'm not like, here's this climate story, like we should all care about this climate policy. I'm like, you know, the world's full of negativity, like we're all in our fields right now. Here's something great that we should care about. And a lot of the time I try and, many of my videos are roundups of multiple stories in one 60-second piece. So I can't get very deep. It's like one long sentence, like 2 or 3 lines on my Google Doc form that I'm writing the script on. So I have to be very concise and deliberate with all of the words that I'm saying, and I talk fast, as you saw in that little teaser. And I try and be like the first step that someone can then be like, oh, this is quite interesting, let me read the full AP article. And I think that I'm doing some stories that are, one story in a 60-second video, but of course that's still not nearly as in-depth as a written article can be. So I think that I take journalistic approaches, and I'm always citing my sources and continuing the conversation in the comments where people are disagreeing with me. I try and provide them with those sources and explain why I included certain things and be as transparent as possible. And yeah, just try and provide, of course, a breath of fresh air, but also reputable, reliable information that people may be consuming because of how I format my videos that they wouldn't otherwise click on and read necessarily.
Okay. Sage, how about you? How do you think about this?
I guess I see visibility or platform building as more of a means to an end. For me, my journey from teaching at Berkeley was then, like, after a lot of press coverage and virality, started getting invited to speak on these like global forums, climate convenings. And so for me, that was like public speaking in front of large audiences. And then I would take the video and post it online and it would get millions of views. And I was like, oh, okay, there's something there. So I think to me, it's more about building the kind of leverage that you can then take as a conduit between decision makers and people in power and then the general public and their interests, because ultimately I'm trying to see a large system change come to fruition. And so I'm always saying that we need a different economic system, and I also think we need to be highlighting the opportunity for innovation and dignified work and entrepreneurship and, you know, capital deployment along the way to building a different economy and a different world. Because ultimately our agenda that we're trying to put forward is a popular agenda. This is a winning set of ideas that people actually like and want and would serve everyone's best interest. To have a pollution, my mic going out? Okay. To have a pollution-free world, to have walkable cities, to have living wages, like those are winning agenda pieces. And so I think that's also we good? That's also the allure of, I think, just having that solutions-oriented lens. Okay. We need to be putting forward a vision for what a better world can look like and offering people something that they can buy into, something that they want to live for, not just a hill to die on. I think too often when, as I said earlier, like when people are seeing a climate video or headline, it's like, maybe call your representatives to stop this terrible thing from happening. It's very often, or it's not as often, that they're being reached with something that would serve and benefit them. And I'm really passionate, or I think as I've learned so much from being exposed to so many different decision makers from every sector and policy and business, and I think I've really landed on like climate finance as the ultimate thing, and I think I'm interested in building that platform as leverage to help big money move more towards investing in climate resilience.
Okay. Jack, when I think about what you do, there's part of me that thinks, you know, as the editor of our team, I could assign a reporter to go check out the subways, right, and how hot it is, and talk to policy people and write more traditional stories. What you do tells those things in a different way. How do you think about that journalistically? I mean, you see yourself as a journalist in the subway, chronicling this? How do you see yourself?
Yeah, before I get to that, the question originally was that we all are making money off this. I'm not, so if anyone... I'm very much so looking for funding.
It might have been a little general. Yeah,
cooler and cleaner subway stations, so that's very much a part of my MO right now. I just want to put that out there.
I can connect you with some foundations.
Perfect. Maybe some people can help out here? No, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've been doing a lot of... I really just started making videos in earnest in May of 2025. Like, I've only made like 30 videos, really, that has gotten me here today. And I've done a bunch of interviews this summer. One notable one was with Emily Sundberg, who writes Feed Me on Substack. It's the 4th largest business publication on Substack. And basically how she worded it was that we're the lab underground. So it's maybe not so much journalism that I'm exploring, but it's like a separate piece of it. Is like we're a lab that are looking for solutions. Yeah, I don't really know how. I'm informing people about this issue, but everyone already knows, come to New York City in the summer and you're gonna, I'm not like teaching anyone anything really. It's just like bringing exposure perhaps. And I'm really wrestling with this interesting thing right now where like, I'm like a very niche, I'm focused on something very specific, right? It's like, we want cooler and cleaner subway stations in New York City, especially for our more vulnerable populations, the elderly, people with disabilities, pregnant women, people on stuff like medications, like antidepressant medications, all these different groups that are more vulnerable to heat related illnesses. That's what we're focusing on. So now I'm at this position where, okay, I have a decent following, probably way smaller than everyone else up here, for this one specific issue, and now it's, we're moving on from that hot season. Do I continue making videos exploring other environmental factors underground, or do I take the leverage I've already built and put most of my time into trying to solve this one issue and not really focus as much on posting videos? And that's sort of the route that I'm going right now, is like, I've used this leverage so far, these interviews, these, Fox 5 News, all these different like radio stations in New York, those connections to really explore this issue and not focus as much on like exploring other stuff. Like I'm still interacting with my, like I post stories on Instagram just to give people updates as like what's going on, because it's very active. But like, I'm just focusing on this one thing. I'm trying to find solutions, and I guess, I don't know how that portrays me in the sense of like, am I a journalist or not? I don't quite know. But.
Okay. No, that all makes sense. I mean, I would argue that you are informing people. I mean, you are even doing what we call explanatory journalism in some ways. One of your posts that jumped out at me was when you talked about the heat index, right? Getting to 136 degrees. The heat index is not just the temperature, but what it feels like to your body when you combine the humidity. So you're teaching, you're teaching in that way. I want to dig in a little bit more to some of the stories that you guys have done. And Summer, I want to start with you. One that I really liked, that really kind of jumped out at me, was on the endangerment finding and the Trump administration's push to overturn that. So can you, first, just for anybody who doesn't know, tell them what the endangerment finding is, and then break down like how you told this story.
Yeah, so the endangerment finding was this finding that legally made it so that carbon dioxide was classified as something that was hazardous for human health, and it basically informed a ton of policymaking in the federal government, and basically required the EPA and all of these federal bureaus to take action on climate change, essentially. And recently, the Trump administration reversed the endangerment finding, which would basically make it optional for them to address climate change in the EPA. So I made a video about it recently, and at the very beginning of the video, I stitched a video of, I think it was Candace Owens in a podcast saying that she really doesn't believe that climate change is real. And for me, as someone who works in the climate space, I don't even usually address questions like that because that is so far beyond what scientists are talking about now. But I used that stitch because I think when you're talking to and making videos for the general public and people who might not necessarily be invested in the climate movement, I often think people are kind of scared to talk about climate change or like scared to tell stories about it. But as Sage was saying, like climate is a winning topic, and people want clean air, people want a healthier future, they want to survive. And so like stitching a story like that where she's saying, oh no, climate change is not real, it's not happening. I think, first of all, I mean, it's good for the algorithm. I think as storytellers online, we're constantly like battling and navigating the algorithm to try to get climate topics to have views online. So it was first of all for the algorithm, and second of all because climate is a winning topic, and when people see something like that, it invokes some sort of emotional reaction. And so then after that, before I even talked about the endangerment finding, I just gave a lot of visuals on how much carbon dioxide used to be in our atmosphere pre-industrial levels and how much carbon dioxide is in our atmosphere now. And I think one problem that I often see in climate storytelling online is people will immediately jump to the problem at hand, just talking about the endangerment finding, without running it back and informing people on why this needs to be talked about in the first place. So I always like to run it back and go back to square one and tell people, this is how much carbon dioxide used to be in our atmosphere, this is how much is here now, and paint it out in a really illustrative way, and just make it simple for people. I think oftentimes this kind of information is, just made so confusing. There's so much jargon, there's so many acronyms. Even like when I talk about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so many people always just say IPCC. No one knows what that means. So you have to spell it out for people and just, go back to square one before you talk about the problem at hand.
Yeah, and it really works just from a narrative structure, what you did. You have the person saying, yeah, no, climate change, not a thing. And then you come on and you're like, and like, oh boy, here we go. And then you bring out the whiteboard and start, breaking things down. I thought it was a really effective way to talk about the endangerment finding, which we've done many, many, many stories, and it's really important, but sometimes hard to grab people. Jacob, your stories run the gamut of the positive stories. I mean, they're just on so many different topics. One thing that they have in common, though, is I think these headlines that you do a couple things with the headlines, and I want to kind of go there. They're yellow, and they're really creatively written, and they show up as the thumbnail on the video. So it's like you see the headline on a video. A lot of times you don't see that online. And I want to read one that just kind of gives people a sense. So rabbit robots, kids ride free, scientists saving seals, building backyard pond. Right, so you're using a lot of alliteration, you're jamming a bunch of stuff in, simple language. Talk through the process of why you do the way that you do. I mean, maybe yellow is just kind of whatever, but I don't know, is there something else there?
Yellow's just a good color.
It's just a good color, okay, all right.
No, honestly, to be completely transparent, the reason I started doing that was so that I could look back on my own videos and remember what I said in each one. I would want to look back a couple months. So you don't redo it? Yeah, so I don't redo it, or if I wanted to see how a certain video, the reception of this story was, or I remember someone had a comment and I had a deeper conversation, and I didn't want to be writing out so much in the thumbnail because then I have to read more when I'm looking back, and also if someone's going through my platform or my profile, of course, and they want to click on a specific video, I think if there's a lot of text, it's likely they'll just move on to another thing. So I try to encapsulate the topic of the story in as few words as possible, and in a way that, on the little thumbnail, maybe someone can make out the text. Maybe that's why I did yellow, so it's a little bit more jumping out from the background. I just take a picture of wherever I'm filming my video, which is always somewhere outside, and that's just the background of the thumbnail as well. So it always gives a little bit of context on what the video, where it will be geographically located. And the headlines are, it's just really the shortest summary of the video and the stories that I'm telling within them. And there's not any rhyme or reason in why I specifically do certain things. Similar to why I choose the stories that are included in a video. It's up to me, I'm a one-man show. It's not like I have an editorial team and I have to report to people. I mean, I don't know the AP process necessarily, but I'm reading a bunch of things and I'm deciding stories that are interesting to me and that I think my audience will like and I think deserve more attention. And it's a kind of similar thought process that I do in a lot of my content, specifically because I think if I'm trying to like reach for something that isn't, going back to this like authenticity piece, isn't something that is what I want to do and what I like doing, I'm not going to be able to keep doing it. I'm posting every weekday, and it's just me doing the researching, scripting, filming, editing, posting, interacting, like many other things as well. So to be able to keep doing it and seeing my face over and over again and my voice when I'm editing, I have to really like doing it. And I think, like, otherwise I would have given up. Like, that's just the truth. And I think, of course, it's a similar story when you're writing and when you're reading back your words. Of course, if you don't like what you wrote, why are you going to continue being a writer? So I think that's kind of the approach I take across the board with all of my content pieces. Okay. And it's why I'm outside. It's why I'm talking about positivity. And it's why I do the thumbnails that way as well.
Okay. Yeah, and the thumbnails, I think they're really effective because in so much information, you're giving people bites of things they might be interested in. In the one that I read, maybe nobody cares about rabbit robots or the person looking at it, but they do care about kids saving seals, right? So you're giving them that touch, and in doing that, kind of inviting them to then go in.
Absolutely, and I also try and do that in the video structure itself, where if I'm doing a roundup, where I try to get the most compelling and widely appealing story to appear first. So a lot of the time it's like animals coming back from the brink of extinction, or things that I'm imagining more people would be interested in, and they would buy into the video. And then maybe the second or third story is like a deeper policy win, and something that if I started with, it wouldn't get as many people to care, but hopefully they're bought into the narrative of the story I'm telling, or the video that I'm telling, and they'll stick around and enjoy all of that stuff as well.
Okay. Sage, a lot of your videos, I would say, are longer form. You really expound on issues. One thing that comes up a lot, and you mentioned it just a minute ago, is looking at our economic system and really making the case that our world is built on extracting natural resources that have a limit, that there's a finite amount. When I've heard this kind of argument before, often it leads to, oh, we should all be socialists, or we should move towards communism and topple capitalism, and you hear all kinds of stuff like that. You don't do that, though. You take things in a little bit different direction. Talk a little bit about kind of the vision that you lay out for a different world, like you said.
I think that is a good point. I definitely have always made a point to avoid buzzwords, buzz phrases that people are going to automatically associate with something else. I don't know what someone's definition is of socialism. Honestly, I've never really studied those like big economic theories that everyone argues about, and I think that's my strength. I think that's to my betterment. We're running a linear economy. We extract resources from nature, we turn them into things, we ship those things all around the world, we landfill them, and then we start that process all over again. And embedded inside of that cycle is the vast majority of our carbon emissions. 7% come from mining, about 10% come from just the fashion industry alone. And the rest of the poly crisis, because I sort of take issue with the fact that we landed on climate change as the problem, because we also have a crisis of over-pollution, over-extraction of resources, and ecosystem degradation. And so if we were to solve climate change, we'd still be running up against other planetary boundaries. And so we need to interrogate our economic system and go back to the way things were like literally for all of human history up until recently, which is a more circular economy where things are designed to be long-lasting, things are made of safe materials that easily biodegrade or don't interrupt with the Earth's natural processes, or if we're having industrial cycles with plastics and metals, those are being infinitely recycled, and making sure that we are just keeping things in use for as long as possible. We have this, culture of disposability. It makes a lot of money, but ultimately, when your economy is built on the environment and we've cut down 70% of the world's forests, there's just not much more to push. We've pushed all we can. And so that's why I'm always making the argument that resilience really is the new alpha when it comes to finance, and investing in sustainability is really about preserving your bottom line. If your business every single business on this planet is in some way, shape, or form dependent on natural resources, even if you think you're in tech or some much more like service-based industry, at the end of the day, you're relying on metals from mining or electricity from the grid or what have you. If we don't invest in modernizing our energy grid, if we don't invest in climate, in food systems that are, if we don't invest in food systems that are adaptable to changing climates and extreme temperatures, our economy, the bottom of our economy is going to fall out. And so getting that, for so long we've been running economic models just completely without the environment being part of the function, when in reality the entire thing is built on a asset class that we are rapidly degrading and cannot replace. So internalizing that into the way that we design our business processes and our economy and our society and our priorities as a culture is really the only way out of this mess. But it's solutions oriented, right? It's invigorating once you see that it's all connected, because to your question earlier, we're not taught about these, we're taught about these things in a very disparate way. You learn about like electric vehicles, you learn about plastic pollution. You really don't understand how much you should be prioritizing these things, or what's the hierarchy of needs, how do we triage, what's the biggest lever to pull. So once you start understanding it from a systems framework, then you can start seeing the way that the company you want to go and start might play a role, or the company you want to work at might play a role. And I think that's just, it's more agentic to have that kind of information and see yourself as part of a bigger picture.
Okay. Jack, I want to go to you. You touched on this a little bit, like where do you go, particularly when it's not hot, right? And I want to tug on this a little bit more because I've seen some of your videos where you look at PM 2.5, right, the particle matter, air pollution. One that was interesting is you look at the way turnstiles are being designed with like the spiky tops, presumably to keep people from hopping over them. Are you thinking about like, okay, I'm going to just continue building storytelling about what it's like to be underground, regardless of whether there's heat? Because there are other things going on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just naturally curious about specifically, I mean, these past, I think about since like probably this February, I've probably spent more time in the subway system than 99.9% of people. Either researching where I'm going to install these sensors or just trying to like, out of curiosity or trying to figure out the angles. You think about the floodings that are happening, the power grid going off and people during their morning commute had to like wait in a train for 3 hours, the private security guards blocking the emergency exit doors, the spikes on the turnstiles because people are hopping and the MTA is losing money, so they're doing these like...
The flooding on the one.
Yeah, there's flooding.
So scary.
The flooding, yeah.
So it's just really interesting. Like, I'm just personally fascinated by this like microcosm of like these really culturally relevant things going on. Like, the comments I get on, you just look at the comments or whatever, it's like, okay, MTA is raising fares to $3 2026. People are commenting, the higher the fares go, the higher I jump. Like, this is how people that live in New York think, right? And it's like, I would be exploring this stuff anyways, but now that I have like a small platform, it just feels more legit, I guess. But like, I'm just kind of very interested in how all these things are connected, right? There's flooding, the trains are always delayed, people don't want to pay money to go through the fares, they hop. There's people getting paid to guard the doors.
They can't afford it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's all these. And then, some things that I'm really looking at now too are like, I'm in this stage where I'm looking for solutions to the heat and humidity within the subway stations. That's my goal. Of course, there's a lot of, kind of technology that we can implement, but there's also like, I'm really focusing on like cheaper adaptable solutions. For example, can we put water stations in the subway stations? Can we put more chairs? Or can we have more strategically placed fans? Things that are kind of more modular, because the train stations don't sleep, right? They run 24/7. 14th Street Union Square was built in 1905, right? These stations weren't built for like modern day ventilation problems. So I'm just naturally curious, and now that I have a small following, you can
build on that. You can build on that. We're almost out of time, so I want to go to kind of a speed question round. I think what you all do are things that a lot of people, whether they're journalists or younger people, I have 2 teenage sons who, this is where they get their news, right? They follow content creators, are interested in doing this as a career. And so I guess I would ask each of you to just say briefly, if you have one tip for anybody who's listening out there, anybody who wants to do content creation around climate or anything, what would it be? Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I touched on this earlier, but talk about what you care about. Like, talk about what's interesting to you, or else you won't be able to keep going. The way that you build a presence online is by making a lot of videos. And you could get lucky early and have some virality, but if you want to continue growing that presence and make a full-time career doing content creation, you are going to do so much heavy research and heavy editing, and you're really going to be immersed in this topic. So if you don't care about it, you're not going to succeed. Okay. And try and do something that maybe other people aren't doing. Spreading positivity, trying to break through the negativity bias, which is very uncommon on social media and in traditional media as well, because it's, if you anger somebody, they're more likely to click the story and read it or start an argument in the comments, and the algorithm will say, oh, that means they like this, let's send it to more people, that kind of thing.
We're changing that, we're trying. AP's trying that.
For sure, AP does a great job, of course.
Yeah, thank you.
But yeah, I mean, if it's good business to be negative, then a lot of places are going to be negative. So I'm trying also to prove that it doesn't have to be that way, and maybe serve as a model for other people to follow suit as well.
Okay, Sage, one tip.
I don't know if I can answer that exactly because I don't know that I'm a content creator, and my full-time job, I'm the director of a nonprofit. So that's the bulk of my work. I guess though, we do absolutely need more people to lean in on this, and I'm trying to identify and empower and resource anybody who I think is like crazy and has great ideas and wants the world to be better. And so whether that's, indigenous food systems or retrofitting the New York City subway, we definitely need more people to take that leap of courage out of traditional jobs and try to be part of making the world a better place in whatever way they can. It's not easy, and there's no clear path. We all have taken very different paths to get here. And I know most of the people, we kind of have a social circle. I've met these guys before, new friend. But we'll talk about this over dinner, wild trajectories. So it's really not a linear path to follow. Okay. But I would encourage more people to jump out of traditional paths and lean in, because the situation is dire and we need everyone we can.
All right. Jack?
Yeah, something I'm really focusing on, and I feel aligned with Sage on this, is the goal for me, while it is really awesome to connect with people online, I've made incredible connections just in the summer with all different types of people in different industries that I would never have imagined. It's the goal is to mobilize offline, right? I want to engage the people that I have been talking to for months on, on Instagram or whatever, and figure out ways that we can all work together to work towards solutions. With the community that I have now, I'm organizing a tree walk in Brooklyn on Sunday as part of Climate Week. These types of things where we're let's actually meet up in real life and get off Instagram, because to be honest, I've gained a crippling addiction now to being on my phone. And it's I'm willing to do that for this cause because I realize that it's worth it, but it's I don't want my end goal to be that, right? I want to get people outside and meet up in real life.
Make it real. Yeah, get it off. Summer, how about you? One tip.
Yeah, I have a few, but I'll try to make it short. I think no matter what industry you're working in, whether it's content creation or anything, I feel like we have a crisis of people doing things that they're not passionate about or that they don't care about. And so I would say, just like Jacob said, do something that you care about. If you're trying to make a dent in the climate conversation, talk about things that you are passionate about, whether it's food or fashion or anything. Start there, because it'll make it sustainable for you. And you'll just naturally shine and just make more of a difference when you're talking to people. The next thing I would say is that social media is literally just a starting point. I've learned that lesson very hardly over the past few years, that it's really just that initial spark for people. You're not going to change people's minds, especially when it comes to climate conversations. I really just try to be that initial spark spark of curiosity or awe, or a conversation starter. I've had a lot of people come up to me and tell me that my videos made them spark a conversation with their family at the dinner table. So yeah, try to think of it more so as just that initial spark. And always cite your sources.
There you go. See, it's journalistic. We have a couple minutes for questions. Does anybody want to come up and please come up to the front? You want to come up and then you come and then you. Yep.
Hi, so my name's Sarah Shipley-Howes. I'm a journalist with the Mississippi River Basin Ag and Water Desk. And there are a lot of conversations happening right now about how journalists and influencers might work together. So some of you have mentioned how you do use journalism and those stories to inform yourself. What do you think about that relationship? And do you have any sort of collaborations with journalists? And what might that look like for you if you were to move in that direction?
Yeah, I could take this first. I make my living collaborating with organizations. I don't think, at least nothing comes to mind on like a formal official collaboration with a publication or journalists, but I'm talking to them about stories and asking follow-up questions if I have them on types of writing that they've done to be able to tell the most compelling story that I'm able to that's from their kind of work. I think that collaboration is super necessary and doesn't happen nearly enough. And like I said earlier, I just do this myself. So being able to get information from journalists and publications, and that's so helpful for me. Of course, it's helpful for them as well to be able to get their words read by more people. It's helpful for me to save me time on the research. I know it's a reputable source. We can come together to figure out the best kind of narrative, that kind of thing. So I would love to do that more often. I think that my favorite part about what I do is being able to collaborate with organizations to focus on a specific story and issue, and it just amplifies that so much. And that's where I really see like the real world impact that I'm having as well, beyond just trying to brighten people's day and give them a little bit of hope. So I think that's super important and needs to be done more.
Anybody else want to take that one?
I think it comes down to trust, and like people, we trust faces and voices really when it comes down to the end of the day. I think those of us who are in this bubble, we overthink it. I, as like a normal person scrolling on social media, am not really thinking about the difference between a CNN commentator or a person on a panel or an influencer. If I recognize their face and I've trusted what they said in the past, you kind of slow down, you watch what they say, and it might be like either calming or if they seem alarmed, alarming, right? Like I trust this person, so whatever they are conveying must be genuine. So we don't really think about that distinction as casual observers or casual consumers of content or news. So wherever we can leverage like the people that people trust, I think is valuable. And so, yeah, I think that partnership with journalism is very important, because if I can give voice to a story or to a perspective that, a traditional journalist who's not a video journalist can't, then I think that's how we can empower each other.
Anybody want to answer? You had a question.
Just really quickly.
Yeah.
Just a personal plug, if you don't mind. Yeah, so like this data set we've been collecting in the subway stations, it's been like 3 months of long-term environmental data. And like a lot of the conversations that I've been having with journalists is around data journalism and how can we utilize this new data set to tell stories, right? So like, I guess the season's already over, but like, can we, I think as people communicating ideas in different ways or using technology in different ways, we have, just trying to think creatively, like how can we approach this issue from a different angle, maybe collect data in a different way, use different types of technologies, what tools can I use, right? I have like a digital thermometer, I have like a thermometer gun and air quality measurement, like can we start to think outside the box a bit? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would say I'm constantly scanning and following the work of journalists, so it'd be nice to have more like face-to-face interactions. And yeah, I just think climate stories are sometimes incredibly hard to get to the masses and the public, so I just really hope that there can be more solid communication between journalists and content creators so that we can amplify each other's work and yeah, just kind of like maybe create systems in which we can tell similar stories and amplify each other. So I don't know what that looks like, but I guess we're getting the conversation started.
Yeah. You want to come up and ask a question?
Hi, so my name is Madison. I'm from the Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution, also known as GAS, based out in Birmingham, Alabama. And I'm wondering, when you're trying to get these topics out to masses and get them interested in some of the climate work that you're doing, because we focus on climate change and environmental justice, how are you approaching that to people, especially through social media? a lot of times climate change in my city is just overlooked or easily politicized and made into corruption. And I'm wondering, how can we talk on a local level to people about these issues to get them not only interested, but able to fight back even when there's a real life threat to them speaking out?
I think about this a lot. That's a really good question. And it was kind of something I meant to say earlier when I was saying I don't know if it was the right idea for us to land on climate as like the umbrella phase. That's something that people cannot see or feel or think about on a human timeline. Like it's inherently hard to wrap our minds around. We're not built for existential risk like that. But like clean water, clean air, pollution, chemicals, these are things that people understand and can feel and touch and that affect them and I think are less politicized or less arguable, right? If the water is contaminated, you can run a test. And that's something that I think people, communities feel much more. And there's this conversation on like the political right in America about like how healthy is our food and, you know, organics, and it comes with a lot of other like more questionable, you know, science and that kind of thing and health concerns. But bringing the conversation back around to where people are at, and like the cancer rate is really high in this community because we have a factory. You can feel it, you can see it, and that's a much, I think, easier battle to fight.
And
not easy.
Diving into that, even beyond here's, you know, Cancer Alley and here's what's happening, it's here's a human being and it's affecting them, and this is what they've been able to do about it or not do about it. The only way I've broken through on social media and gotten people to remember what I'm saying when it relates to climate, which even beyond the politics is so boring and technical. Like even if there was no political issues, it's hard to get someone to care about a boring technical topic online when you're competing with food and pranks and travel and all these things that are so much more stimulating. And the only way we can compete with that is tell really human-focused, engaging stories. So it's not talking about this giant polluting plastics facility. It's talking about this 62-year-old mother named Noreen Allen who went out in her community and brought everyone together and took down this plastic facility, and here's how she did it, and here's how it was affecting her and her neighbors, and getting people to care by focusing on Noreen instead of the plastics facility, and then sneaking education under it a little bit.
I have an interesting point. Like, I'm very conflicted in this manner too. It came up in the first panel around like, actually, I forgot what I was gonna say about that, but it's all gonna come back around. The question is like how to engage people online, or like ultimately it's what I've been learning a lot about the TikTok algorithm and the Instagram algorithm, and like different videos on different platforms have perform in different ways because those algorithms are probably searching for different things. For example, some of my videos on TikTok, the best ones, there's one where I did, you know, like guess how bad the air pollution is in Broadway Lafayette BDFM, and I put a mask up before, just kind of like a little thing. But it wasn't like an actual surgical one. It was just sort of like, it didn't do anything.
A cloth one.
It was a cloth one. So I kind of rage baited people without really meaning to. And like all of the videos on TikTok, the best ones have all been because people are like basically just calling me dumb in the comments. But through the hate comments, the word still gets out more, right? Like, so another one was, I'm like very skeptical of the fan placements inside the train stations. They're like really close to the outlets on the ceiling, and it just feels like hot air. So I had a video where I was like, can anyone tell me why the ceilings are on the fans are on the ceilings? And everyone's like, this dumbass has never heard of a fan before. It's like, what do you mean? I'm just asking a question. But like that engaged people, right? So like I don't really know what the answer is, but it does seem to me to work these algorithms, you have to actually like piss people off, or like I've seen a lot of videos where people are doing stuff purposely wrong, but it doesn't seem like they're doing it wrong. So then people are going to comment on the video and up the algorithm. So like that's something that I'm conflicted about. I'm not really answering your question, but I'm like equally as confused, right?
You know, you just gotta sometimes go for it and, you know, rage bait a council member.
Sure, yeah.
And it's such an interesting thing to the point where we're getting around to the point where things are staged, right? Like people are so deliberately confronting Congress people and whatnot because it's going to go viral on social media and it's a publicity stunt. No comment on the like usefulness of that tactic, but it is a reality of the media situation we're in today, which is that people are going out of their way to intentionally stage public moments. It's interesting.
Summer, anything to?
Yeah, I think oftentimes I feel like, at least as a video creator, I'm going through a lot of word gymnastics, trying to figure out how to get these points across without using jargon. So it's a really tricky task, and I'm still working through it, but I oftentimes try to avoid saying climate or just certain words that instantly like turn people off. And then the second thing is, like, if you go and look at my page, you'll see that it's very aesthetically pleasing. And I think, at least when it comes to video content, that is really important. I could be talking about the most serious topic in the world, but I'm always gonna have some sort of beautiful aspect going on in the video. I'm gonna have good visuals. I'm gonna have my glam on. And recently I've been using a whiteboard in my videos and just like acting like I'm some sort of teacher. And I just think that sort of like non-traditional storytelling has been missing from this conversation. So yeah, don't forget about aesthetics.
We are going to have to leave it there. We're at time. I know there were more questions, but we're right up at time. I want to thank all of you, Jacob, Sage, Jack, Summer. This was really great. I encourage everybody to check them out online. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. And for anybody who's watching the feed, thank you for tuning in. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you.